Before we begin the intro and all the good stuff referring to this video, I must provide a disclaimer. Yes, this is going to be political in nature, and yes, I will be discussing legalities and other legalese terms in pertaining to this video. However, I myself am not a lawyer, nor am I trying to force a certain political belief upon you guys when you're viewing it. And yes, I know this content might not be for everyone, but it is something that has interested me, and of course with me being an Australian myself, I feel like this is something that I should bring at least to the attention of those who may not have known about the case or may not understand just what happened regarding it. So either way, just take this as being more of an opinion piece, and whilst yes, I do have a legal studies background, I myself am not a lawyer, and this is not to be taken as being a concrete, definitive legal opinion, but rather just the opinion of someone who is discussing the topic that interests them. Okay, now that's out of the way, we can actually get started on what this video is meant to be about. As you can see by the title, this is the Hakeem Al-Araibi case, which has really caught my interest as being both a football/soccer fan, whatever you want to call it, and somebody that is more interested in just seeing the underworkings on how the system works and how, like, the AFP or Australian Federal Police, the government, and other agencies work in regards to cases that involve criminals, or alleged criminals, as I should say in this case, overseas when they are Australian residents, or not quite citizens, as he only became a citizen this week, actually. How, in my honest opinion, the case was bungled on all sides. Anyway, I'm going to save you the bullshit, of course, with the disclaimer and now this sort of intro. Welcome to Cynical Apex Commentaries and the Curious Case of Hakeem Al-Araibi, or how it was bungled. At least that is in my opinion. So I do feel like I do need to give some backstory on this situation, just so you guys can have a broader understanding at least on just what happened and what led to the topics that we are going to be discussing as this video goes along. First of all, Hakeem Al-Araibi is a Bahrainian-born, Australian-based now citizen, as I said during the introduction, as of this week at least, footballer or soccer player, whatever you want to call him, who is 20 years old and was recently involved in a governmental scandal, if you want to call it that, or at least something that had been brought to the attention of the general public via the political handling of it from both the Australian government, the Thai government, the Bahraini government, and the AFP, or as I've said before, for those who aren't necessarily sure on what that means, it is the Australian Federal Police. Not exactly a comparison to the FBI, but yes, there is the correlation between the two, as they do fill the similar sort of roles in the grander scheme of things. However, that's not what we're here for. So let's get back on track with what we're actually here for. Anyhow, Hakeem had been alleged, or rather the Bahraini government, because they didn't agree with his political alignment and him being outspoken on the treatment of Bahraini footballers, at least over there, from the government at the time, or that is still in power, I believe, in pertaining especially to the Bahraini uprising of 2011, which is something that is only relevant in regards to his thoughts on it, and something I may discuss a little more in depth if you guys want, and if I have the time to actually discuss it. Anyway, he was alleged to have vandalized a police station due to his brother allegedly confessing, although we're not sure how valid that confession actually was, especially when you consider that Hakeem had an airtight concrete alibi at that time, as he was actually playing in a publicly televised football game. Which, of course, due to the fact that I'm 99.9% certain that cloning actually hasn't been invented yet, or at least isn't in widespread usage, that he literally or legitimately could not have been a part of the vandalism due to the fact that he was in a place that was 20 kilometers away, rather, and that you can't really be in two places at once, aside from the aforementioned cloning. However, police alleged that there was every opportunity that he was there, as they were saying that instead of the 6:30 time frame, which was covered by his alibi of playing on TV, which had been confirmed by not only the television station but also the Bahraini Football Association, fellow players both for his club Al-Shabaab and the opponents, and Al-Shabaab themselves, which of course would blow a hole through the prosecution's case if this was verified, and that the time frame was 6:30 and not the 8 p.m. time frame, which was, by the way, 40 minutes after the game would have finished. At 7:20 p.m. is when the game did finish. However, prosecutors decided to extend his stay of detention for another 45 days, which allegedly, according to Al-Araibi, and from what I can at least find online, they used to try to torture and coerce a confession out of him, much like they had apparently done to his brother, who alleged that his supposed confession that kick-started all of this sort of drama. And the arrest of Hakeem, which happened on November the 7th, 2012, as he was heading to a cafe to watch El Clasico. For those who don't know much about football / soccer, that is a Real Madrid versus Barcelona rivalry game, had also been coerced, which, as we all know in the legal system, a coerced confession cannot be produced as evidence, or at least gives the defense a gaping hole to attack in if the case does ultimately go to trial. After the 45 days of torture, as he put it, was completed, he was released on bail and later tried in absentia, for those who don't quite understand legalese, which, although this should explain itself, it basically means he was tried in absence and convicted of the vandalism charge, sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, as I said, it was in absentia because after being released on bail, he fled first to Qatar to play for the Bahraini national team in 2013. Then he headed to Iran and Malaysia and Thailand, and then finally in Australia, where he sought asylum, noting that Bahrain, or at least the Bahraini sheiks and government at the time, would pursue him and continue to do so until they had reached their desired endgame, which of course would be him in prison on the vandalism charges, which, as I've said, and as the evidence has shown, especially with his alibi and the sort of coercion of confessions in it, may have not happened, and he may have actually been innocent, or, as I actually do hate using that term when it comes to legal discussions, due to the fact that you are never technically found innocent, rather you are found not guilty, which is the term that I will be using from now on in this video. At least he would have been found not guilty. Now, from what I have seen, and at least from what adds up in my opinion when it comes to the case, yes, he would have been found not guilty for the vandalism on November the 3rd, 2012, and had resided in Melbourne from the date of his arrival in Australia, May 2014. It should be noted that he wasn't immediately granted refugee status, as due to protocol, the Australian government and immigration authorities do have to revise and look over each immigration case and treat them on their merits, which is something I do agree with, because as we know, the system can be abused by people who don't actually have a legitimate cause to claim asylum. And you do need to sort of weed out those cases from those like Al-Araibi, where there is actually a legitimate cause to claim asylum and to become a refugee in another country in this case Australia, due to political motivations behind supposed criminal cases or anything political really in your nation of birth, in this case Bahrain. That would, however, be resolved in 2017 when he was granted refugee/asylum status, which gives him protection from prosecution if the Bahraini government were to pursue that path, which you'll find out a little later as we go along the discussion. That is exactly what they desired to do and had been wishing to do all along, but couldn't due to him having the asylum/refugee status and, well, not being under their jurisdiction at the time, as they didn't really have a means to extradite him, nor did he have a stable enough location of residence that they could actually go and tell the government, hey, we want you to arrest this guy. But also I should mention that he had gotten married, and he got married, I believe, in 2018. I'm not entirely sure on that, but yes, he did get married in this timeline. But before all that, in 2016, when he spoke to international media, he actually tried to state that the sheikh at the time, who was running for the presidency of FIFA following Sepp Blatter's fall from grace and resignation due to corruption scandals, which I won't go into here because, again, they aren't necessarily relevant, but I may also do another video on that as a football/soccer fan and as someone with at least a baseline knowledge of the corruption situation and everything that has gone down with that. Of course, the Bahraini sheikh did not win, but is still the president of the Asian Football Confederation, or AFC for short, and is a vice president still of FIFA. Of course, I should also state that in the interim period between him arriving in Australia and gaining the refugee/asylum status, which I forgot to add, allowed him to have sort of protection and documentation on him at all times to show that yes, he was a legal refugee. He had been playing as a defender for semi-professional teams in the NPL, which is the National Premier League, and our sort of pseudo second division or second tier for those who know football and might not understand that there is sort of a structure underneath the A-League, which is our professional league. And his most recent team is actually a team that is quite local to me, and that is Pascoe Vale FC in Pascoe Vale, Victoria. Duh. Anyway, now we get to the stuff surrounding his actual detention. On the 27th of November 2018, he and his wife flew into Thailand on a belated honeymoon, and they were detained at Bangkok's Savala Broadby Airport. If someone from Thailand, or if anyone who knows how to pronounce it, can actually clarify how that is pronounced, I would be much appreciative of that. I was just going off how it sounded in my head, or at least how I read it. But anyway, they were detained on a supposed red alert by the Bahraini government and Interpol that had been enacted on the 8th of November 2018, but it was rescinded on the 30th of November 2018 as it went against Interpol's policy on treatment of refugees. However, as I said, because they actually detained him on the 27th, it was before the red alert had been rescinded, so it was still in effect and they could detain him at the request of the Bahraini government. It had been reported that apparently the AFP had sent notice to Interpol of his arrival in Thailand and had not flagged his refugee status, or had not told him about his refugee status at the time, although the Australian Federal Police, AFP, had denied that and said that it was indeed Bahrain, which is what I'm inclined to believe with the whole story of the case and the whole political motives behind it, had actually issued the red notice, and Interpol, before knowing about the refugee status and acting and rescinding it due to it actually being in violation or contrary to what they would, pertaining to the rights of refugee and the immunity that refugees of a certain nation had from persecution, rather, I should have tried to pronounce that correctly, in their nation of birth, which this case definitely fell under, whether those be for legitimate criminal means, which had to be decided by Thailand if they wish to extradite him to Bahrain, which we'll get to in a little bit on just how those proceedings went, or if they wish to release him and allow him to return to the country of which he was a refugee. In this case, that would be here in Australia. On December the 2nd, he and his wife were moved to the Suan Plu Immigration Detention Center, which, as I mentioned, his wife was later released from, and I believe she did return to Australia, whilst he was moved to Bangkok Remand Center, where he would be remanded in custody awaiting the date of his trial, or the extradition proceedings in this case, which, yes, would be a trial, as he declined and refused to voluntarily be extradited back to Bahrain out of fears that he would be tortured and incorrectly tried on a case that he had a concrete alibi for and was not a part of, at least according to his lawyers, who stated, as they had all along, that this trial and this case had underlying political motives due to his outspoken nature about the persecution and treatment of athletes who were pro-democracy and a part of the uprising in Bahrain in 2011. From there was a huge sort of outcry internationally within the footballing and political commentary or political community in general, which were calling for him to be released and were actually connecting the case to another case that had happened around the same time, which was Ralif Mohammed, who had been detained also in Thailand at the request of Saudi Arabian authorities, although he had acquired asylum in Canada. And all of them were calling for the hashtag Save Hakeem to be trending, which it was, including the luminaries such as Craig Foster, Didier Drogba and Jamie Vardy on both an Australian and international scale, as well as FIFA Pro, which is the Professional Footballers Association that FIFA endorses, the Football Federation of Australia and the Footballers Association of Australia were all calling for him to be freed. However, it would come out on the 5th of February that Thailand's Attorney General, via the court system, believed that Bahrain did indeed have a legitimate, if you want to call it that, due to all the contradictions and flaws that were in the legal documentation that the Bahraini authorities were basing their conviction or case of him off, as stated by the BIRD or BIRD, which is the Bahraini Institute for Rights and Democracy, rather the main supporters that Hakeem had in Bahrain, of course, as I've already previously stated, and as you probably would have picked up from the whole theme of this, Hakeem was pro-democracy and pro the 2011 uprising. Of course, there were other issues that were involved in this, as the case of refoulement, which is seen as a grave/severe violation of human rights treaties, including the Vienna Convention and other international laws and regulations that have been set about by the United Nations or UN. And of course, as we know, the UN is the key proponent of human rights in international dealings, which is what this was. Refoulement basically means sending an asylum seeker back to their country of birth when there is a legitimate concern of torture or other violations and fears of safety due to political beliefs, race, nationality, gender, and all that sort of stuff. And as I said, it is a severe breach of human rights to actually refoal someone, which I do agree with, as after all, if there are legitimate fears that they will be tortured, whether or not the torture is valid or not, you probably shouldn't be sending them back, as after all, there is a reason, whether or not that is 100% legitimate, which if you do grant asylum, you would assume that it is at least 85-90% legitimate that they would be in danger of torture when they return, so why would you be willingly doing so? Luckily, in this case, they were not willing to do so, and rather they were actually appealing to Thailand and Bahrain to free Hakeem and allow him to come back home to Australia. Anyway, as per the court's ruling and the Attorney General's statement that Bahrain did have a legitimate case, he was detained in custody until what would have been the 22nd of April, when the second case would have been ascertained, and he would have, whether or not he would have actually been sent or extradited back to Bahrain or officially released. However, as you'll see now, we actually aren't going to get to that date, as a week after the whole case, the whole drama about the extradition, the Thai prosecutors actually and thankfully showed compassion and did, in regards to the outcry at least, or in response to the outcry, I should probably say, and did release him and allowed him to return back home to Australia. It should also be mentioned that the main reason why there was even the chance of him being returned to his country of origin, Bahrain in this case, is because Thailand is actually not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Rights Convention and has strong economic dealings and relationships with Bahrain, so of course they would somewhat side with Bahrain, so to speak, if that's the wording you wish to use for this, and sort of kowtow to their whims, no matter how legitimate those whims actually are, which is something that we do see between nations that have those strong economic links with particular countries, especially lesser developed nations, which isn't meant to be offensive or anything, because when you actually look at the grand scheme of things, yes, Thailand isn't as developed as a nation like Australia, England, America, so of course they're going to rely a little more on those relationships with countries within their own bloc or region, more so than other countries that have more development or have more infrastructure that can stand alone, or standing infrastructure would, because they don't necessarily need those relationships, whilst a country like Thailand can easily be seen as more so needing those relationships to actually sustain themselves and not wanting to burn those bridges. If it is an instance or something that is more general and more of a wider brush sort of thing of having a friend that you know is 95% wrong, or you are at least 95% certain that they are in the wrong in it, but you don't necessarily want to burn that bridge with that friend and are too afraid to call them out due to that. I can understand the rationale behind not calling them out. However, you should really call them out, and maybe it might dent the relationship a little bit, but honesty is always the best policy with this sort of thing. Now, did Thailand know about his refugee status? No, and the AFP did admit that they bungled it, which I agree with. However, they also did try to follow protocol from the Interpol, which is what the NCB, or National Central Bureau of Interpol, that is here in Australia, at least the Australian branch of it, of Interpol rather, did try to follow protocols and policies, even though they might be slightly outdated. Rather, it's not even a case of might. They are indeed outdated, which meant that once the news that he was indeed a refugee got to Interpol, they rescinded the red alert. But as I covered, that was a couple of days later than he had actually been detained, and that the red alert probably, or well, not even probably, would not have, that is 100% definitive, it would not have been issued if they knew that he was a refugee. Then again, which begs the question, how did you not know he was a refugee? Where was the disconnect within the systems and processes to actually know, hey, this guy's actually a refugee of this nation, so he probably should not be detained. So let's actually get that out and tell them. That is what my issue is how did the processes actually bungle that? How was the disconnect so that you didn't get it from the AFP or immigration to Interpol before the detention actually took place? Sure, maybe you can't necessarily act proactively all the time. However, in a case like this where you have a suspicion or at least know that someone is traveling, someone that might be in legitimate danger, is traveling to a country that could easily extradite him to his country of origin, why would you not put steps in place to protect him? Why would you not put something in place where he will be safe and under your blanket protection that you had guaranteed him when you gave him the asylum that he sought, when you granted his status as an asylum seeker? But alas, this is all hindsight and just theory talking at this moment. Anyway, he returned back to Australia on the 12th of February to a crowd of supporters who cheered him and, well, gave him all the support that he needed. And then, as of this week, as I said, in fact, it was only 4 days ago, as of the recording of this, on the 12th of March 2019, he was granted Australian citizenship, which makes him now a legal, official Australian citizen, and furthermore protects him from potential future persecution from the Bahraini government, and makes sure that our government takes the utmost care of him should he wish to travel to a place like Thailand or, well, anywhere in Asia, as well as allowing him to be covered by the Australian footballing system from a professional standpoint now. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to talk about. I just want to give you guys an outline of the case, scattered in with a few of my own personal opinions and a few things that you may not have known or, well, did not understand rationally before I discussed this topic. But anyway, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you want more content. And there will be another video as I posted on Twitter at Cynical Comments, as always, if you guys wish to follow me there and get news on when I'm planning / recording / scheduling videos for release. There will be a video most likely on Tuesday, although that is dependent on time at this point. But yes, you can expect it to be at Tuesday or maybe Monday, but most likely Tuesday, and it will probably be, again, a more light-hearted video, which is something that I've always wanted to do. I've wanted to mix sort of light-hearted videos with more heavy-hitting ones. Anyway, I'm going to let you all go now, so bye!